Hey, great. Started. So today is our founder spotlight, and we're having Daniel Komolafe, CEO of First Electric. And I've had great conversations with Daniel in the past. And when you have some good conversations offline and you're like, this needs to be recorded. People need to hear this because Daniel is really doing really great stuff with his company in Nigeria. So Daniel, maybe we'll start with you telling us a little bit about, yourself, how you started your career out, and where you are right now and how things have been going so far.
Yeah, hi, Time. Thanks for inviting me to your podcast or Founders Spotlight. Yeah, my name is Daniel Komolafe. For those that don't know me, I'm an engineer by training, so I'm an electrical engineer. Finished university many years ago. I'm from the UK. Did my bachelor's and master's in the UK, and then I always wanted to come back to Nigeria. To live the Nigerian dream, which is basically building something that would benefit the people here. So it was a no-brainer for me to come back after my master's to take on a job in engineering, right? So my first job was a sales engineer working for a Swedish company, quite popular one. And then I moved into my dream job, which was working for GE, and I did that for about 13 years. But yeah, how the founder story came about was, being in Nigeria, lived through not having a lot of electricity and with the power cuts that goes on a day-to-day basis. And most importantly, having installed power plants globally working for GE, put power plants in the UAE, put power plants in North America and Schenectady, and also in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. For me, it made no sense that still in 2025, Nigeria is still struggling with electricity. So I really believed in the solar dream, that solar could be mainstream, or even not even mainstream, can play a more important role in solving the energy access crisis. And that was why I set out to do something about it, because I felt I could make a little bit of an impact. And the rest, they say, is history. And in 2019, I decided to start up First Electric as a company, basically on a mission to solve Nigeria's electricity deficit challenge by deploying clean energy solutions in a way that is affordable and accessible. So those are the two things we're trying to do. Affordability is very key for us. Accessibility is also very key for us. And doing this in a way that's using renewable energy technology is the third thing that's also very key for us. So that's basically very short overview of how we're here now.
I love that. I wanted to kind of step back a little bit into when you started a company and what that process looked like, because some founders, if you're working for this big company and you want to start your own thing, how do you go about that process? How did you decide, okay, I'm going to start something. If it works, okay, I'm getting bright signals that this is working, so it's time to leave my full-time job and go do it? Or did you just leave your full-time job and go do it immediately? How did that process work, transitioning from a big GE company, which, is really, really big, and you could have just been there and probably moved up the ranks to become senior vice president at some point? How did you make that a transition to like take that role of, I'm going to take a pay cut, I'm going to not worry about payroll, which you never had to worry about, other people's payroll, which you never had to worry about before? What's that like for you?
No, great question. And it's not very glamorous, right? Let's face the facts. It's a very difficult decision. You need to be very, very convicted to do it. I can tell you for free. I mean, it's easier to maybe, if you were not working for a big company, and maybe if you're not even working, you didn't have a job, and then you started something, it's a bit of an easier transition. You're moving from unemployment to starting a business. Working for a big multinational like GE, where the salary was pretty good and the prospects for career growth was abundant across the world. Because in GE, I had worked in the UAE, I'd worked in the US, I worked in France, I worked in Cote d'Ivoire. You can read, it's a very mobile company. They can move you around. A fantastic opportunity, right? So I asked myself the same question too, but to be honest, I think for me, it was something I alluded to earlier, a burden for the work GE was doing, right? Wasn't translating in a significant way to the people at the bottom of the pyramid. I still go to my hometown, Akure, and other communities in Ondo State where I'm from. And these people don't have electricity. You can't even buy a cold drink. You can't buy cold water. It's just it's really bad. And GE wasn't going to come to solve that problem. Even if I waited 10 more years in GE, that problem would not get solved. So it was a desire to actually do something meaningful. For me, I personally want my life to contribute to be a bit more meaningfully to society. So it's a personal motivation I have to do something that contributes meaningfully to society. I think that was fundamentally the reason why I decided to think of do something out of my comfort zone. But let's talk about practicality right now, right? Because the bills still have to be paid. That's a fact.
Right.
Whether you're working for GE or you're working for your startup. I mean, I'm married. I have kids. I have to pay my children's school fees. I have to pay the rent. I need to do. So in practical terms, what I did was I started First Electric in 2019. I just registered a company and I hired a few employees because the GE salary was very good. It could afford me to pay people, you know, a good enough salary in Nigeria. And I also took advantage of the fact that the salary levels in Nigeria are somewhat lower than the, Western average. So you could hire like a decent engineer and pay them, let's say, $300 a month. Right? But whereas in the US, you can't get away with doing that, right? But that $300 a month was something that was competitive for the local market conditions. So with the GE salary, I could hire 1, 2, 3, 4 people and pay their salaries consistently, even if we sold nothing, right? It just means I would have less money in my savings, right? The first few years, and that was basically what happened. So for the first 5 years, for the first 5 years of First Electric, we made a loss. We made a financial loss at the end of every year. We were growing by at least 100% year-on-year growth, but we kept making a loss because I kept investing the money back into hiring more people, into buying assets, into creating a structure that made sense, into intentionally creating a structure that could attract financing. So I make sure I had to hire the right auditors, I hired the right lawyers, I use the right software for accounting, and these are not cheap. I paid for all the permitting requirements and all the licenses I needed to run an energy company in Nigeria. These things are not cheap. So for the first 5 years, we're making a loss. Well, we were growing tremendously, but we're making a loss. And so GE really helped me to bridge that gap because I was using my salaries to offset some of the financial gaps that existed. Even if we were making cash flow, we were making some cash flow, but it wasn't sufficient to cover all our costs. So of course, how did I make it work? So I got some money from family and friends, of course. I did a standard family and friends round. I think we raised around probably like 20K or 30K from family and friends, nothing significant. And then I approached a few angel investors, took some small, very, very small investments. Just recently, actually, just last year, we raised our biggest angel round, which was 300K USD. But everything was like basically 20K, 5K, 10K, small checks. So when I left, so what happened was the DARES program came up, right? And it was a platform for getting some subsidies if you can deploy at scale. And I had spoken to a few financiers, right? And they did show based on let me go just take a step back, right?
Yeah.
In 2021, so we started the company in 2019. We did some good projects. We started doing the energy assist, the lease. We started off with a lease-to-own business model where we basically provided solar solutions to people and let them pay small over a period of time. But we quickly ran into trouble because people stopped paying the bills and we had some big financial issues. So we stopped that model. We didn't do it anymore because we were gonna go bankrupt if we had continued on that line. Okay. So we changed the model. So we decided to still offer flexible payment terms, but we didn't do it with our own cash anymore. We did it with a bank. So we tell the customer, go to certain banks that we had relationships with, and the customer would the bank would underwrite the loan and qualify the customer, and the bank would pay us the money, and then we would install. So then we were still offering pay as you go, but not directly with our own cash, but with the bank's cash. But still, that wasn't catering to people at the bottom of the pyramid because you still needed to have a decent job and had a regular income before the bank would give you money. Okay. So it's partially solved the mission of the company, which was to provide solar to affordable solar to everybody, but wasn't solving the main segment which I wanted to address. And so we were thinking, what is the most bankable way to address this segment of the population. And we came up with the energy as a service model, whereby we pay for the asset. We use our balance sheet or our financial rigor and discipline and structure to attract financing, deploy the financing at scale to incur assets or to pay to build assets, and let customers pay per kilowatt hour for what they use. Because when we did our research, we found that people did not inherently want to own and maintain solar. They just want to go and turn on the light bulb and expect electricity to be available. And if someone could take the burden of buying, this financial burden of buying, and also the operational burden of maintaining a solar asset, they were very happy to pay on a, as pay as they use. So we came up with the energy as a service business model. We pitched it to the first impact investor that believed in us, and this was All On. I'm not sure if you heard of All On. Yeah, and we were fortunate to. We were one of the 13 companies in 2021 that got a funding, and I think at that time it was 100K USD funding. Was a blended funding. 50K was debt, and 50K was the grant. And we used that funding to deploy the first 2 mesh grids in Ondo State, and that was done in 2 different communities. And we decided to pilot mesh grids for the first time ever in Nigeria at that time, which was something that was quite innovative. And I would also talk very quickly about why we chose to do the mesh grids instead of traditional mini grid. So All On financed the first mesh grids, and those mesh grids are still operational till today. And it was on the back that success of operating mesh grids for 3 years plus, we're able to build a more robust pipeline and basically access capital to scale to where we are. But the reason why I started this story, because when I started having conversation with Infra Credits, it was very clear that they were willing to finance us, but they hadn't signed the agreements. They hadn't committed on paper to finance. But knew for a fact that if they knew I was still working for GE, wouldn't take it seriously, okay? Because no one wants to give you $1 billion financing for a project and you tell them you're not working full time. I mean, it's just not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So I had to make like a year, about 8 months or so before we eventually reached financial close. I had to just take a gamble and say, you know what? I don't have any money in my pocket. I believe the business model makes sense, and I believe I have a bankable project, and I want investors, both equity and debt investors, to take me seriously. I have to show I'm a good custodian of their funding, and I can return back either return on equity or interest at the right time to these people. There's no better way to show that than to tell them you've abandoned your 95 and you're fully focused. So I took a decision to just quit. And that was basically what happened. I just quit my job because I just really wanted to pursue the potential of securing the financing. And so that's what I did. And I just quit my job, right? So there was I didn't think that was it. It was do you want to give yourself the best chance of securing funding, or do you want to keep around and do you want to just keep, so you know what?
Yeah.
Nothing good comes easy. Nothing good comes easy. You can't you have to make a decision at some point. You have to, right? And if you wait for the conditions to be perfect, it will never happen. So yeah, I took a risk. So for the first 3 months, it was tough. I had some savings, but by the time the financial close happened, I was literally out of my savings, completely out of my savings at that point. So yeah, it wasn't a very romantic or very easy. What happened?
That's a great story. Thank you for providing that overview and background. And one thing I took from that story was, don't just make that leap first. Have some savings, try to put some of your own resources into it if you can, because that way you could also, because I see this as a way of de-risking the business for outside investors too at some point, Then when you start getting clear signals, right? You start getting, okay, these guys are gonna commit about a couple millions to me. For me, that is real. If it's not really guaranteed, but I have done this and done that, and this track record, I've shown my working, as we say. I think this is time to kind of take that leap. It's never gonna be perfect, right? But it's like you need to have some kind of savings to allow you to do what you want to do. And once you start getting the real signals, you go ahead and go forward. But I wanted to go into some of the story you had spoke about, especially with respect to the lease-to-own model when you started it. Could you give us an overview
Mhm.
of the Nigerian power sector, right? Because for some people who might be, listening to this, they might have this idea of just NEPA. Some of them might have this idea of just disco. Some of them might have this idea of, using generators. But I don't think anybody really understands either the off-grid market as well as they should. Mostly it's people who are in this business. I kind of understand that aspect of it. But just give us an overview of the sector and why the lease to own model was the first approach you took, and then how you had to pivot to the energy as a service. Because I think that is a great aspect of your company, which I really, really like.
Yeah, absolutely. Nigerian energy markets, the general consensus is Nigeria is the country with the highest energy deficits globally. Right now, the numbers that is most accepted is 85 million people in Nigeria out of the population of just over 200 million people that have access to reliable electricity, right? And of those 85 million people, about 60% live in rural communities. And also in both the urban communities like Lagos, Abuja, the cities, and also we still don't have, Abuja, and we still have power cuts every few days or every day. So that's kind of the market. We have the Gencos that provide about 5 gigawatts of power, mostly from hydro and gas, like the likes of Kanji, and Gerugu and the other IPPs. And then we have the generator market that most residential customers and businesses have generators to kind of bridge the gap. When the grid is not available, they use generators. And then we have the solar providers. There are too many to mention. We have a couple that focus on CNI, and those are the big boys that do stuff like banks, big shopping plazas, big supermarkets. And then you have a lot of the solar people focused on residential solar. Too many. Every electrical person now is a solar developer, right?
Yeah.
And so even the banks are now into selling solar. We have the likes of Imperium, which is like a subsidiary of Sterling Bank. They now have like a solar platform where people can actually go log into the website and place an order for solar. So banks are even starting to sell solar solutions directly to customers. So what's the market opportunity here? The market opportunity is that solar has a significant capex price. I think that's a global phenomenon, right? And in Nigeria, that is quite significant. And it's more significant in Nigeria because the per capita income in Nigeria is very, very low, very, very low compared to the Western average. So many people that desire access to solar, many of them, majority, cannot afford it. That's just a fact. And that's a very, very clear fact. And this is very true. Majority of the 85 million people cannot afford to buy solar. Right. And even if they buy some kind of solar, like some solar lanterns, it's very small solar lanterns that people buy at like $10. But these solar lanterns cannot contribute to productive use, or they cannot fund productive activities. You can't use it for commercial use. And so the economic benefit you can derive from using solar is not realized because people still cannot afford productive solar. And that's basically where we try to come in. You have so many people providing solar solutions, but not enough people providing solar solutions with financing. Maybe nowadays there are more people. Over the last 6 years, a few more people have come on board. We had the likes of Sunfi, we have Earthbond. There are a few people now starting to roll out business models addressing this particular problem of people not being able to afford outright purchase of solar. But we got to this many years ago, 2019, where we saw that there was definitely a market for high net worth individuals to buy solar, but that market is actually very small. But majority of people actually need some kind of financial support to be able to afford to buy solar. And that's why we decided to do the lease to own, because for two reasons. One, it has been true to our mission of providing energy access to everybody. And secondly, it gives us a wider market because the high net worth individuals is quite small. And then and it's very saturated, right? So you need to kind of develop a new market in order to continue to grow your business. So that was the reason why we decided to do the high net worth individuals whenever we can, but most importantly, try to do a solution for the masses that needed financial support. But there is a lot of indiscipline in the sector where people don't tend to honor terms of agreements, especially if you're not a bank and you have no collateral on them. Because we didn't, it was unsecured financing we gave them. There was no collateral. At that time, we didn't even do a credit check. We're not that sophisticated enough to, there wasn't even a very good credit checking system. Nowadays, there is a few tools to do credit checks, but then there wasn't something that was sophisticated for us to use. So yeah, we ran into trouble because I guess we didn't we didn't have enough tools to qualify the customers correctly to pick the ones that would have a lower chance of default. So we had let's say at some point 60% of our own contracts were being defaulted. And then we just decided that we cannot scale this business the way it is right now because this business is broke. This business model is currently broken and we cannot scale this business. So we did two things, Tom. We did two things. The first thing was to pivot into energy as a service. And then the second thing was to develop a system. It's called a time meter. It's like a pay-go system that we could attach to the inverters so that if the customers don't pay, then they're not able to use the system.
Okay.
So we actually developed like a device that takes in some codes and locks the system for 30 days. And once they pay at the end of the month, we unlock the system again for the next 30 days. So it was like a 30-day lock-in mechanism. So we did those two things, right? But we decided to scale the energy as a service model and focus more on that instead of even when we had the technology, which could help us to put some kind of control, but we felt that the energy as a service was more true to our mission of really going to the underserved communities and providing solar solution. So that was why we decided to focus more on the energy as a service rather than scaling the lease-to-own model.
Okay, that's great. I've heard similar concerns too about the lease-to-own model, and the guys who are able to kind of do this to scale, to kind of build it into the system. So the box automatically has a code that opens up, and if you don't pay, the lock can lock through the CRM system.
Exactly. Perfect.
Because I remember if you don't do this, there's almost no way by which you can, have any real control of people paying you. And one of the major problems is even after doing that, you couldn't and they still didn't pay, how do you get back the systems? There was this issue of figure out where the systems are, because I don't know if you know of this company, Lumos. I haven't heard about them.
Yeah, I know, because some people actually take the Lumos and they run away with it. They run away with the system and you can't even recover it.
Yeah, exactly. Understandable. They kind of did the same thing, but a lot of their systems where they had to write them off, and that really affected the business as a whole. I don't know where they are right now. I don't know if they're still a business, but I don't hear of them anymore because I don't know, in 2014, 2014, 2013, 2014, they were the ones everyone talked about there.
Yeah.
They had this deal with MTN and things were really going good. So that's a good pivot you all made. So tell me about this energy as a service. How does it work in practice? So do you go to like an estate, get a community, build a solar, install your own meters at the houses and charge them, or like a shopping complex? How does that work?
So we have two energy as a service models. We call one and we use mesh grid for rural communities. And I'll tell you why we decided to do mesh grids instead of mini grids. And then for urban centers like Lagos, Abuja, and cities, we also do energy as a service, but we do microgrids, right? So we do microgrids in rural, in urban commercial only, no residential. So we don't do residential in urban cities, but then in rural communities, we do both residential and commercial using mesh grids. So mini grids have been a thing for a while, and they're fantastic solutions for rural electrification. But when we evaluated the landscape, we wanted to prove to financial institutions that energy access is a financially viable venture. Okay. The feedback we got from most financiers was that without subsidy, the mini grids are not viable, right? And it is almost impossible to scale a business on subsidies. I mean, you can't rely on subsidies to scale a business. Back to the drawing board, and we scanned the industry, we scanned all the technology options that's available globally, and we asked ourselves a question: what technology can take us to financial viability in the shortest period of time. Okay. And we realized there's sub-segments of the rural communities that's it's very unprofitable for mini grids, very unprofitable for mini grids, which means there are many of these communities, many, and nobody wants to touch them. And why don't they want to touch them is because the cost per connection is so high. And the reason is because a majority of that cost per connection goes into transmission and distribution expenses. Because if you look at the rural landscape, particularly in the northern part of Nigeria, you may have a house here and the next house would be 500 meters away or 200 meters away. These houses are very, very sparsely distributed. But if you run a mini grid, it's a centralized solution. And you have to take power from that centralized solution and run that power to so many of these sparsely populated houses. And imagine there's like one house at the extreme end of the community that is basically 2 kilometers away from the next house. You're going to run a 2-kilometer cable just to supply a house that consumes maybe 200 watts hour per day. Makes no sense.
Kilometers?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That's far. But it's either you exclude that consumer completely or you run a 2-kilometer cable to that house and they consume 200 watt hour per day because they are guys a light bulb and a fan and charger. So, and I said, well, there must be a better way. Can we do something that does not constrain us to basically taking cables from point to point, right? And we looked at and we found this Australian OEM, very new at that time, because they're also quite a new company called Okra Solar, right? And they were looking to deploy their innovative technology called mesh grids. And what is the mesh grid? A mesh grid is basically a decentralized solution where you have solar panels on the roof of the houses, no powerhouse anywhere. So the roof of the houses serve as your location for installation of your solar panels. And then from that house, you connect the houses very close by the main house. So the main house is called a hub. And the houses very close by, when I say very close by, I mean less than 50 meters. And that's surrounding house called a spoke. And then you can use the hub to power the spoke. Thereby, you're sending power less than 50 meters to a location and not 2 kilometers. And if there's another house located maybe more than 500 meters away, we don't need to connect those two houses together. You start a new cluster. So we have these clusters of hubs and spokes all around the community. And that's what the mesh grid is about. That's the kind of architecture of the mesh grid. So you have hubs and spokes all separated within the community, and you're not bound by interconnecting everybody together, right? Everybody can still have power. At the same time, your cost per connection is much lower because you're saving at least 90% on transmission and distribution cost. And most importantly, you can still do productive use because people say, well, why don't you just deploy a solar home system, right? The reason why you can't just deploy solar home systems because solar home systems are quite small in power. They probably like 200 watts, 300 watts, 500 watts. But then we wanted something that could contribute to drive economic development in these communities and something that can power like fridge, freezers, grinding machines. And then with the Okra solution, it goes up to 3.6 kilowatts, right? And that can provide enough power for productive use. So yes, you can get this, you still get the benefit of productive use, but you get the flexibility of deploying on house per house basis and without the disadvantage of a significantly high transmission and distribution cost. So that's the reason why we decided to go for the mesh grids. And that's how our energy as a services works. So we have the solar panels, the inverter, the batteries, and then a smart metering system that does all the billings, and then a payment system that is integrated with the smart metering system so customers can pay via mobile money. So there's one thing to note, like in the network, there's no cash exchange. It's 100% a cashless network we operate. So it's all done via mobile money. So to prevent leakages and to be able to track your revenue effectively.
Wait, so you're saying you don't even have to have a local agent that is able to like disperse like
no agent. We don't have any agent.
So all you need is a phone number and that's it.
That's it.
That's fantastic. Even in the urban areas too?
Yeah, even in the urban areas. You don't even need to have a phone number.
Okay, so how do you know your customers?
I mean, we take their names, take their names, but if they don't have a phone number, we can generate an account number. So each meter gets an account number, and then they have this account number, and they can tell their friend, hey, Mr. Friend, send 2,000 naira to this account number. And then once the money gets into the account number, then the credit is automatically credited onto the smart meter.
I think that's very fantastic. Tell me how have you ever had the problem of electricity theft? Because I remember when we started developing projects in some of these communities, we didn't think that this was going to be a problem, right? We thought that, we had the master meter on the pole because, many of us use the standard mini grid structure where you had a distribution network. And I was one of those who,
Yeah.
who did that. And I remember talking with a colleague in the industry, and he said that, oh yeah, they've been dealing with electricity theft. And I was like, wait, what? How? So one time I went back to our system to kind of like look at what's going on here. And we found like 13 people were literally using electricity for free. And they've been doing it for months. We didn't, it was just shocking to us to see that happen, because we thought we had found a way to kind of mitigate that risk by having the meters on the pole that can aggregate everybody else and doing the audits and all that stuff. How has this been a problem that you all have experienced? And if so, how have you guys dealt with it and you plan to deal with it on an ongoing basis? Because I understand that you're scaling this mesh grid, or is was the mesh grid just like designed to not let this happen? Because I'm really impressed by this mobile money.
Yeah, sure. We don't have much of a problem of electricity theft, and that's because of some guardrails put in place. For example, all our smart meters are IoT enabled, so we can monitor them remotely from our offices. Okay, and that's the first guardrail we put in place. So whenever we notice that the meter is not billing like it should, then so what we do is, in each community we electrify, we have one person or two people employed permanently on a monthly salary, living within the community. We call those people local maintenance, right? So if we notice a particular meter is not billing properly, or a particular meter has not topped up for a week, send our guy to check what's going on, right? And then we can quickly notice if there is an issue. There have been some issues of people, what's the word?
Bypassing.
Not really bypass it. You can't really bypass. You can't bypass the meter per se, because it's a DC system, right? You can't really well, if you're really clever, yes, you can find a way to bypass it. You can find a way to definitely bypass it. I think the IoT nature of our systems and the fact that we have the local maintenance agents that basically checks on the system on a daily basis gives us enough revenue assurance, because we can basically see how much revenue we're generating on a daily basis. And we can see like how much power is being consumed, when was the last time this person topped up. There's a lot of information that comes out from the data that we can, that basically prevents that bypass to go on for a long time.
So Dan, your pattern recognition within your software needs to be like pinpoint, because as you scale, you're going to have at some point easily hundreds of thousands of customers, and you need to be able to pinpoint exactly which meter is not, topping up as it should. If you were topping up every time for like 5 months, then for some reason in the last 2 months you didn't really top up at all. And like, I need to be able to figure out where that meter is, the specific asset class that meter is in, and the specific location. So you can actually send the on-ground maintenance team to go look at it, right? And yeah, so your software should be able to do something like that, right?
Yeah. The software is now, we've put a layer of AI on the software, where we can easily query and say, show me the 20 least meters generating the least revenue, or the meters that I haven't been active for two weeks. And the AI just basically queries everything and shows us, right? That's something that's already been implemented right now. So the AI basically can look through all the data and brings information for us. And also they notify us. The AI also notifies us if we can set certain thresholds and say, if a meter has not topped up for 48 hours, maybe that's a bit short, maybe for 7 days, send an email, right? And the AI system will send us an email that these are the few meters that have not topped up for 7 days. And then the LMA agents can go and find out if there's any challenge or something. So the system is pretty smart and pretty optimized.
So how many communities are you in right now?
Right now,
Yeah.
legacy communities are three, two in understate, one in Abuja. We've just secured financing for 20 more communities, which we started deploying right now. So we're in 20 more communities. So that's 23 communities. Work is ongoing right now. And we just started building the pipeline for our next 30,000 connections, which we plan to start deployment by Q4 2026. And that would be in 70 communities. So we're hoping by the end of this year, we should be in 70 plus 20 plus 3. So we should be in 93 communities by the end of the year.
I mean, that is so from 3 to 93. How many? 10,000x or at least 1,000x?
I mean, if we don't install all of the 93, all of the
Yeah.
70, this is where we're going to start, right? But for sure, by H1 2027, we should have been done
So
with all the
you're
70.
building a basically integrated, decentralized utility, more or less.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Nice, nice. That is, I love that. And okay, I want to talk a little bit about your capital stack because I've always felt that one thing that a lot of businesses in the sector struggled with was or is the macroeconomic differences or discrepancies that could happen because you make usually all your bills are in your revenue is in naira and a
Mhm,
lot of times your bills are in dollars. You're paying
mhm,
Crow, you're paying all these other guys who want dollars for real and important reasons why they want that,
mhm.
right?
Of course.
How do you, and so I've always felt that in this space, you need to be big. Like you don't have a choice. You need to be big, like just like physically. Your company needs to have turnovers that in and out easily every year, close to $1 million or $2 million. And in our context, that is big. Or at least in the Nigerian context, that is big, right? How do you and your capital stack needs to be designed in a way to be able to manage different kinds of asset classes, right? How do you manage that? Because you can't put all your equity into 93 communities. You have to raise some kind of debt structure to do it. And because we're in this space, there might be some aspect of blended financing. How do you manage that? How are you able to manage that team, the finance team? How are they thinking about scaling
Yeah.
from to 93? Because I'm assuming that you would have a very, not a complex, but at least a very diverse capital stack to be able to deploy, execute, and operate 90 communities within a span of 1 year.
Yeah, great question. And you're speaking to the converted because we had suffered massively from taking obligations in hard currency, suffered
Yeah.
massively. Still suffering actually, because we're still paying back some of those obligations as we speak right now. And that was a lesson, that be careful in Nigeria to take long-term financing in hard currencies, especially when your revenue base is in local currency. So for us, we're a purely infrastructure financing play. So we need to look at our business from how do you finance long-term infrastructure?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the premise of everything. For us, we have a preference for considering local currency financing, and that's exactly what we're using to scale at the moment. Local currency financing. Okay. But there is a play for foreign debt, right? Foreign debt. There's a play for foreign debt, especially because our immediate expansion is within the framework of the DARES program, right? And the DARES program, it provides USD grants subsidies. Okay. So initially, with the current scale up we've done for 5,000 connections, we were not able to get our cost per connection to cover the entire capex cost, right? So we will still have an obligation in naira that would last for at least 2 years post deployment that we'll still need to service from the revenue cash flows we get from operating the asset. But the next scale up plan, our plan is to get that cost per connection down, that the subsidy would cover almost more or less 100% of the capex. And if we can get to that price point, then we can access foreign debts at very low interest rates, maybe sub 10%,
So from your
and
balance sheet,
then
same.
no, so we'll access that from a funder in maybe in the US or in Europe,
Hmm.
right, for infrastructure, knowing that the grant that's going to be paid by the World Bank is in USD and would cover 100% of the debt. So there is no gap. So the money we take from the US at a very low interest rate would be taken out completely when the World Bank pays the grant. So that would
Okay.
be, if that economics checks out, that would be the only situation where we would consider a foreign currency denominated loan. Otherwise, we're sticking to Naira debt.
Okay. So not trying to be crazy or anything, but you did mention that it's very difficult or nearly impossible to scale a business with subsidies. But looks like this is the strategy here a little bit, or no?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is a subsidy
Yeah,
window right now.
yeah.
Okay. It's going to be a bit silly of me not to take advantage, but
Of
currently
what's
available.
happening? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we have to basically build the business. If we're going to build unleveraged subsidies to basically run a machine and have a very, very secure asset base that's maybe in a few years generating $30 million recurring revenue, right?
Yeah, that's very powerful.
That asset base, and if the subsidy goes away at that point, fine, right? We have an asset base that generates $30 million recurring revenue. We can leverage that asset base as collateral and attract competitive debt without the subsidy and scale more infrastructure projects,
Yeah.
right? So there is a window of opportunity right now. We need to leverage on this as much as we can, build a steady base, a steady cash flow base, and then on the basis of what we've accumulated, start to expand in a sustainable manner.
So I think the strategy here then is for what you're saying to become real, the strategy is the communities you identify need to be high performing communities because
Not really. You'll make them high performing.
okay, how?
You make them high performing. I mean, a community that's never had access to electricity and you give them electricity, what do you expect them to do with it? They're
Yeah,
going to
so
be
like
like,
I
okay,
mean,
thanks.
yeah,
So
it
you
won't
need
be
to make them high performing.
yeah, what I mean is that communities without access to electricity usually is not exactly without access to electricity. Is that somebody has a gen somewhere that everybody goes to charge their phones, and he powers the gen maybe like 4 hours a week or something. That's usually the case for those kinds of communities. But then if you're talking about the communities that are really, really remote, like those that really have no access to anything, especially which is more common in the north, I think those are communities that look alike from the outside point of view, but internally they're systematically different. One,
Yes, they're very different, but both of them, both of the examples you mentioned right now, are both not high performing communities because even the generator wants 4 hours a week, you cannot run a business model on that, right? So you need to make the communities high performing. For example, what we're doing is for the 5,000 connections we're doing right now,
yeah,
we've already factored in the cost of light bulbs and cooling fans. So we supply as we connect you, we give you a fan, we give you a light bulb, right?
so how are they
So
making
that
pay?
they're gonna use the light, they're gonna use the fan, they're gonna turn on the fan.
Yeah. I mean that's for sure. But like, how are they going to make this money to pay you for using the lights and the bulbs?
I think it's a myth that rural community dwellers are poor. And it's not really true. Rural community
Yeah,
dwellers are not poor.
I
I mean,
agree
if you
with
go
that.
to
Yeah.
Abababugu, one of the communities in Ondo State that we serve, right? In a month, one of my customers made like 10 million naira from selling cocoa. One bag of cocoa is more than 1.5 million naira in revenue. One bag of cocoa, 50
Okay.
kg bag. And these guys are farmers. So they're making
Yeah.
money from agriculture.
Yes. Okay. But that is a high performing community, no?
Now, performance is not in how much money they're making. Performance is how much energy they're consuming. So they may make money, but put the money in the bank. You need to give them avenues to consume the energy. That's why you need to stimulate the community by giving access to appliances that consume energy, preferably appliances they can use to generate income. For example, in one of the communities we serve in Abuja here, we give them a ice block maker so they can make ice blocks and sell the ice to neighboring communities that don't have power, right? And even if so, we charge them $100K a month for the ice maker. It's a lease-to-own model for 1 year. So they're gonna pay 1.2 million naira for the ice maker. But we're making a margin on that. We're making a margin on that already. We're making a margin of like 20% on the sale of the appliance. But the appliance itself consumes roughly 20K or 30,000 naira per month in energy. So we're making money of the appliance. We're also making money of the energy the appliance is consuming. And the customer himself is making a shitload of money because that ice block maker makes him 300,000 naira in revenue a month. So if
And you
it's
haven't
making
seen any sorry, and you haven't seen any, differences in the communities across the country? Because the assumption I have, which might be incorrect, and I'm happy to be corrected, is that communities in the southern part of the country, especially rural communities, are not really that rural. They are usually densely packed communities that have no paved roads, essentially. So people call them rural, and they're really high functioning communities. And even some of them don't even have access to electricity. And I feel like that is different than communities in
100%.
the northern part of the country.
In the communities in the northern part of the country, you need to do a bit more work.
Okay.
You need to do a bit more work to ensure those communities are higher performing. 100%.
So the cost to serve
100%.
them is higher for sure, then. That's the assumption.
Yes, the cost to serve them is higher. Yes, for sure. Cost to serve them is higher.
One thing that has me a little bit worried about this business is the labor intensiveness of the business. That regardless of all the software we're deploying, so imagine now in this community you're operating in, you've done everything and everything is seamless. Internet of things, smart meters, solar, but you still got to hire two people, and in the community, and this is going to be the case. So you have 20 communities, that's 40 people already that you're going to be paying. Maybe at some case there might be levels of efficiency where you can have like two people handle multiple communities if the communities are close to each other, but let's assume at least 20 more people. What are your thoughts on reducing this cost? Because even and that's why I think that, you said you avoid urban residential homes. And I think part of that too is just because of the high cost of delivering the power system to those houses, because you actually have to do two visits at least, deploy the solar, put it there. And that is just expensive in itself. And because you taking this one trip or two trips to this one house, your cost already in those communities, or your labor cost without equipment, is already high. How are you thinking about managing this labor cost going forward? Because some people would say, in other countries, how they've managed or mitigated this is having a revenue requirement or a rate of return regulation where you're guaranteed a return, especially to cover your costs, cost recovery mechanisms. No matter what you spend, you cover all your operational costs, and we add an extra on top so you can make something on your capital investments. But that's not the case here. Essentially, your company and companies like yours are completely exposed to market risk. How are you managing that labor cost?
I don't really see the labor cost. What's the labor cost, right? I have a community of 500 people, right?
Yeah.
And each person gives me $10 a month on average. That's how much we probably make, $10 a month. And there's 500 communities. That's $5,000 a month revenue. Okay. What's the labor cost? Let's say you have two people, right? Between the two people together, you probably pay $100 a month.
Okay.
Minimum wage.
And that's it.
Right? Because most of these LMAs, they're farmers. They also have their farms to do within the community. And the additional minimum wage we pay is supplementary income that they just use as additional income source. If you're making $5,000 a month from a community, what is $100 in labor cost?
It's a minuscule amount. It's less than.
So
what to say?
That's not a problem.
Okay, so by the labor cost, I also included, the construction costs, getting.
No, you cannot include construction costs. Construction costs is capex.
Capex. Okay.
And there's no consumables. There's no O&M costs. No panels are not consuming gas or petrol.
Yes, they're
It's
not.
just working.
True.
Sometimes you have to clean the panels, but that's their job as the LMA is to clean the panels when the panels are dirty.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to buy some shampoo, some soap to wash it. You're spending an extra $1 on shampoo once in 3 months.
So maybe that So when you run the system like this, mostly it runs by itself. But usually there's a time where someone will call you, a meter stops working, and these tend to compound fast to the
Why?
extent
Why
that
would
it,
the meter not work? Why would the meter
I don't
not work?
know. I don't know, but this actually happens. Like it they
The meter in your house, where you're staying right now, has it ever stopped working?
no, it hasn't.
There you go.
No, it
Why
hasn't.
would
But the meters that we deployed when we were running our own business stopped working multiple
well,
times.
you could have bought meters from me, right? Maybe if you bought meters from me, you wouldn't have that kind of issue, right?
So this is a quality problem. Okay. Okay. All right. So one last question that I wanted to talk a little bit about is I've realized that when, and we mentioned this about, making money in Naira and spending and having obligations in dollars. And this is just beyond, your capital obligations when you're servicing capital. But it's more about just operational expenses. I was talking with my colleague, and we were like, we're literally just making money for this international foreign CRM companies as providers. I call it the
Yeah,
scourge of SaaS. I call it the
100%.
scourge of SaaS. And I'm worried that, and as we scale, 'cause the pricing is starting to get like ridiculous. They would tell you, okay, this is the standard amount, to use our platform. Then for every customer you add on, we add this amount. Every customer you add on, we add this amount. And you're like, in your head, it's 200 customers, so it's not a lot, but immediately just count the numbers. So if I have like 200,000 customers, geez, I am paying you a lot of money, right? How are you thinking about that going forward? Because I feel like your cost is about to jump, and you understand your cost structure better than I do. But regardless, from 3 communities to 92 communities, this is about to jump because you're about to start managing a lot more people, a lot more software talking with one another. Are you guys building this platform locally? Because that's what I'm thinking that we should start thinking about doing instead of utilizing these other platforms. And there's the idea that these guys have been around long term and, they have service level agreements and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, yeah, we could do that too.
So you can't be in the business of everything.
That's true.
You
But you
cannot
can
be in the
invest in
business
it.
of everything. If you're spending a shitload of money on that particular aspect, yes, maybe. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, everybody uses Google. We're not all gonna build our own Google servers, right?
That's true, but I don't think that is a good analogy to this problem.
Okay, let me use ChatGPT, right? Everyone is using ChatGPT.
Okay.
Or let's do something that charges users per customer. Let's see, Google Mail, right? Google Mail.
It's free. What are you talking about?
No,
Mostly free
Google
if
Mail
you stay below like 5 gigawatt.
for you. It's not free. They charge me $8 a month per person.
Okay, Google for Business. Yes, that is
Google for
that.
business. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
Google for Business. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
So I think in such cases, we are considering local options where the local options are equally good, right? In such cases, we're considering local options where the local options are, and this is specifically for our fixed costs. This
Yeah.
is important for our fixed costs operations. But when it's a variable cost item, what I mean by variable cost item is if I'm getting one installer for a new community, then it's not so much important because there's an incremental revenue that is coming from that activity. So, and as long as the incremental revenue by far outweighs the incremental cost, then the net contribution margin is positive and I'm happy. But where it's more of a concern to me is for fixed costs, like office costs, email costs for employees, especially employees that are not profit center employees, then I think that's more of an issue. But wherever we can find a local provider that is more affordable, I can pay in Naira, we're definitely going to switch to that option, for example. So yeah, it's a valid point for sure.
Yeah.
But it's something that we need to evaluate to find a local provider that can offer similar services.
So do you think you might have the room because I am of the opinion that this industry needs to consolidate and consolidate fast. And that's the way you can reduce costs per connection quickly. You need to be bigger, you need to be stronger, you need to have a standard, a very powerful financial team that is able to navigate multiple currencies, especially if you want to start having this very complicated capital stack, right? And to do that, I feel like there needs to be some level of vertical integration. Maybe not manufacturing the panels. Maybe that might be too crazy, too much. But maybe from the entire process of it, your entire operations, all your software that you use, at least business operational software. So softwares that need to be in the field that you need to have some serious level of control over. Because I remember a specific situation where we couldn't get a code to work on a specific system, and we had to be talking to some guy in France to help us get it figured out. And this was just taking too long and too much time. And it
Yeah,
took a week to address, right? And it's a
yeah,
real thing that happens. And we all have a service level agreement, and we all had that cool stuff. But we're like, are we gonna enforce this?
100%.
So aren't we willing? Is there a room to kind of work with local providers, or even start building some of those things yourself to the extent that you have, I have this amount of cash that I can put towards this, and let's
Mm,
test it out in our own, in a very controlled pilot trial.
yeah,
You can make as good as, the international providers, for example.
100%. We experienced similar, right? I'm not going to
Yeah,
mention names of the companies we were not very happy with.
yeah,
Smart metering companies,
yeah,
smart metering and vending companies. We're not very happy with them. And
yeah.
then um, I started a metering company also. I'm not sure if you're aware.
I'm not aware. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop you the URL.
I
Okay.
love that. That is what I'm talking about.
Right. So I started a metering company, metering and vending company, because of the
Yeah.
frustration I had experienced with metering and vending providers.
Oh,
And now my metering and vending company provides services to several mini grid um, developers. We don't charge a monthly SaaS fee. It's paying in local currency. Like, yeah, so 100%. But the issue was there were not that many Nigerian entrepreneurs that were focused on building technology in this mini grid space. So there was a
yeah.
vacuum. And that's why we were kind of tied to the European OEMs and vending service providers, SaaS providers. But now I've just shown you one, right? And there are many more that are coming.
Yeah. So this is really cool. This could be a whole new conversation.
I don't want to talk too much, but let's connect, right? And it's
Yeah.
honestly cost of operation almost next to zero and employee headcount 2.
There's no way.
Yeah.
I am impressed. This is really cool. I know, really good stuff. Okay. Okay.
So
What can I
whatever
do
problem
about
you
this?
face, I know exactly what problem you're trying to get a token, a 20-digit token to build
Yeah,
maybe a safe
exactly.
token or I know you don't need to say no more. We
Okay.
solve for us. We let our
Yeah.
developers and generate as many tokens as they want. We
Yeah.
have access to everything. So no need to call
Mm,
anybody anywhere. Just go generate a token, put it in yourself. That's it. It's done. Right?
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love this.
But we're not fundraising. We're not looking for investment. We're already profitable.
Yeah, yeah. That's where you should be. That's always where you should be. But just to wrap up this conversation, tell me a little bit about your plans. Like you said, 92 mini grids. What's your financial strategy like? Are you guys raising? Are you guys not raising? Do you want to plug
Oh yeah,
anything?
we're raising.
What are your
We're
thoughts
definitely raising.
on? Okay, okay,
And now let's make it because it's been an hour. We've been speaking for a while actually. So just
yeah,
to
yeah,
wrap up, because of the scale at which we're trying to grow, where
mhm,
we're going from how many 20 communities
yeah,
to another 70, that's a major scale up, right? And our funding providers would only provide 80% debt. So
mhm,
we need to come up with 20%. And even if we save all our retained earnings, we don't have enough cash to basically come up with 20% of the capital required. Just to give you an example, to finance the 70 new connections will cost us around $12.5 million, roughly. And if they finance 80%, we need to look for around $2.5 million.
okay,
So
yeah,
for this year, that's our equity target, to raise $2.5 million to unlock the full financing so we can deploy 30,000 connections. By end of next year, we would also be raising again another maybe 5 million. And
mhm,
this continuous raising of equity is
mhm,
something that will continue for the next 5 years, I think, until we have significant cash flow and maybe we decide to focus on maybe maintaining the asset base. Because our target is within the next 5 years, we want to get to 200,000 connections. That's basically providing electricity for 1 million households, 1 million people, right? So that's our stretch target: 200,000 connections within the next 5 years. That's 1 million people electrified. And to do that, we need to scale aggressively every year. So we
Okay.
will be raising equity almost on a yearly basis, unfortunately, for the time being. And then at some point, we may decide to just focus on just operating the assets we have and not
Yeah.
grow as fast. And maybe at that point, we would not need to raise more capital because we would have enough cash flow to, if we want to grow by 10%, we have enough equity to grow by 10%. But if you want to grow by 100%, then you run into trouble and you need to raise more money. So that's kind of where we are right now. So we're raising
Okay.
$2.5 million right now. In case you want to invest, you're welcome. We'll take your money.
For
And
sure.
we'll keep doing that next 5 years or so.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. This was a great conversation, as always, Daniel. I'm excited we got to record this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this founder spotlight. And I will be in touch and follow up with you, especially about Grid Core, because I think that is cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be in touch about
Great.
that for sure. I'll be definitely
Yeah.
in touch about that because I wanna learn more about this because I think this is super cool. And I think that
Also financing, we're giving the developers access to finance because once you keep using our system to collect your revenue, we see
Mhm.
your cash flow profile and we can say, well, we've seen how much money we settle to you every day. Let's give
Yeah,
you additional working capital at X% rates per month. There's a whole bunch of things we can do over there.
that's amazing. I love this. I love this. Anyway, thank you so much
Yeah.
for the time. I appreciate it and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for letting me talk about my business. And yeah, let's keep in touch.